I kind of want to begin this episode by talking about the titular memorial itself. Because believe it or not, it's one of those things I've heard discussed amongst Voyager fans more often than not. It's a strange thing what fan bases and people in general will tend to grab onto and continue to discuss in the future. And in this case, again, the memorial itself, and this episode being an example of that. I really want to address this even though sci-fi debris has basically covered all this ground. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right now, he and I agree on several points when it comes to this episode, so you're going to be hearing some repetition. Nothing for it. It's not like I am aping his work, because, again, I agree. Let's talk about the memorial itself. For those of you who aren't watching these or don't remember, whatever, the memorial itself, the actual monument, beams out engrammatic altering rays of quantum that basically build memories into your brain so that you actually have memories of a traumatic, horrifying event where 82 civilians were massacred by twitchy and weary and terrified troops, and then it was attempted to be covered up. Obviously, I say attempted because naturally these events were actually experienced by people and, got into the monuments. Obviously, they did actually get the word out about this horrible travesty that happened, despite the attempts to cover it up. So that's what it does. This is horrifying. I'm just going to say that as bluntly as I can. The first and most obvious reason why this is horrifying is it is incredibly invasive, without warning, I might add. They attempt to kind of gloss over the whole warning thing by the fact that Voyager, puts a beacon saying, warning people away from the system, or giving them a warning of what exactly is going to happen in the system. And yet, they flat out also mention they want this to be running for another 300 years. I find myself wondering if their warning beacon's still going to be there 300 years from now, but getting off topic. So it's incredibly invasive. Imagine for a moment if you happen to be driving through... I guess that'd be... That's not Pennsylvania, is it? Shoot, I don't remember. This driving through... Oh my god, you know what? Hang on. No, I'm going to look up a map. Give me a moment. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the state. I want to say Pennsylvania, but... It is Pennsylvania. I'm absolutely right. Damn it, I hate it when I'm right and I don't realize it. So I want you to imagine for a moment. Yeah, there it is, right there, southern Pennsylvania. I want you to imagine you're just driving along I-81 or I-70 going towards Baltimore. There you go. I'm staring at a map right now. Or heading to Harrisburg, or you're just going through southern Pennsylvania, and all of a sudden you start experiencing vivid, horrifying memories of, well, you see where I'm going with this, of Gettysburg, of the Battle of Gettysburg. You're not at the Battle of Gettysburg. You just happen to be nearby it. Because remember, it's not being in orbit of the planet that does this. It's being nearby within basically systems range that does this. It had quite a bit of a reach. And so why... I mean, you see the problem here. Imagine you're just driving along and all of a sudden, stabbing and horribleness and just all the terrible things. I lack the words to describe, the pain in your feet and your bones are aching, and you just realize that you can't feel your left arm because it's not there anymore, and you're charging up the hill. Imagine that. You're just driving along in the car. Okay, does that sound horrifying? Now imagine your kids in the back are feeling that too, and or your significant other and or family member who happens to be sitting next to you, or did I say and or? Whoever it is, the other people in the car who aren't even driving are suddenly experiencing that too. Imagine you're going to like a Walmart and all of a sudden, you get where I'm going with this? That's horrible. That's horrible by its range, and that's horrible by its invasive nature. There's no pop-up ad that suddenly pops up and said, would you like to experience horrifically traumatic events? No, it just beams them right into your brain. Beaming horrifying events into someone's brain is a supervillain plot. Second point. It is destructive. For two big reasons. First of all, the doctor flat out says this is having a deleterious effect on their brains. It is actually removing their ability to think and function properly. On a basic physiological level. Excuse me. God. But the other side of thing is much more horrifying. Okay? I'm probably going out on a limb here to assume this, but I assume if you're watching this, you're a decent person. I mean, sure, we're all sinners, as the saying goes, but I'm sure you've done. You're overall more of a good person than a bad person, right? I mean, you may have stolen money here or lied about this there or whatever, but you've never, just to name an example at random, massacred innocent civilians, have you? I feel like I'm fairly confident in the fact that whoever I'm addressing right now, whoever's watching this video right now, is in the category of hasn't massacred civilians. One of the things I've often said in real life is that there's tiers. There's tiers of severity when it comes to most things in life, and atrocious acts is no exception to that. We all have done things that we regret. We've all done things that we lament and that were stupid or foolish or whatever. But I think most of us can safely say that we have not caused the death of 82 innocent civilians. Because that's pretty frickin' high tier, wouldn't you say? In fact, it's one of the highest tiers, I'd say. I'd say there's maybe 2 tiers above that. And one of those is only higher because of scale. So, I want you to imagine for a moment that you, with your brain, your personality, your soul, whatever term you want to use, whatever it is you think of or believe in, it does not matter because it all means the same thing in the end. What makes up you is suddenly inundated with memories of doing this horrific, atrocious act, as if you did it. Remember, they are not observing events, they are remembering events, as if they had actually done them, which, point one, incredibly invasive, and point two, incredibly deleterious. But point three is the worst of all. Most people don't really understand post-traumatic stress. It's a term that's tossed around a bit. Post-traumatic stress syndrome is actually really horrible. I have some personal experience with it. I am actually still suffering it to this day for certain events that have happened in my life somewhat recently. And it's pretty bad. So the reason it's so horrible is because of the fact that it is such an irrational thing at its core. You have such an irrational reaction to things that remind you of the horrific events you've been through. Make sense? So now all these people are suffering from post-traumatic stress for having, again, actual, built, engineered memories in them of these horrific events. And this is the final and most horrible part of all, the total schism between them and their memories. This is why I made that point earlier. You wouldn't go out and kill 82 people, would you? Would you? Just be honest about it. I know everyone's going to joke, oh yeah, I do it all the time. No, seriously for a moment. This is not something we do. This is not something that is in us to do. You put a gun in my hand and put me in front of 82 people, I'm not going to be able to pull the trigger. I couldn't do that in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Okay? I was incapable of doing that in a video game. You think I could do that in real life? And yet, suddenly, I have memories of doing that in real life. And so now, my brain is arguing with itself. My soul, my sense of self, whatever it is. Again, whatever it is you would define it as, the me, the what I define as me, is suddenly in contrast with itself. There's that schism. There's that conflict between who and what I am as a person and what these memories are telling me. And they are at complete odds with each other. Why? They show this so clearly in the episode. Harry Kim is probably the best example of this. Great props, by the way. I just want to pause for a moment. Great props to Garrett Wong, to Ethan Phillips, to Robert McNeil, and to Robert Beltran. All four of them put in great performances in this episode. And they really nail the roles, especially Ethan Phillips and Garrett Wong. Both of them are phenomenal. Huge, huge props. Garrett Wong perfectly acts as the completely shell-shocked, completely just destroyed mentally and emotionally person because of exactly what I'm telling you right now. Harry Kim is probably the most innocent, green, naive, kind-hearted person on the ship. Really. To put him in the position of killing 2 people out of a reactionary fear. He is so... how does your brain correlate with that? You notice they don't start getting better until they realize they didn't actually do it. That extra knowledge helps the side of them. I keep saying brain. The side of them that is them fighting against the invasive memories. Being able to tell themselves, this is me, not this. Because before that, there was that conflict, and it would rip you to shreds. It would absolutely rip you to shreds. I usually prep myself for these episodes. I've talked about this before. I do a lot of prep work before these episodes, even though I screw up, all over the place. And I found myself like, okay, I'm going to try and pretend, I'm going to try and imagine, I have a decent imagination, what it would be like to have actually done these horrific events. I couldn't get more than 2 seconds into it. This is not a joke. I couldn't do it. There's a reason I came up with that Modern Warfare 2 analogy, because I realized as I was doing it, I couldn't bring myself to do that in a frickin' video game. I couldn't bring myself to imagine what it would be like to gun down innocent civilians like that. That was just... So I can completely understand where these people are coming from. And all this brings me to my final point. This memorial is evil. No, not bad, not wrong. Evil. This is horrifying. I mentioned that this episode has been talked about a lot amongst Voyager fandom, at least back when I used to really circle the Voyager fandom a lot more. I should say Star Trek fandom a lot more. I used to go to conventions a lot more. I used to be on a lot more message boards, that kind of a thing. Don't really do that as much anymore. Most of my interaction with Star Trek fans tend to be with you guys. And a few friends in real life that I still have, of course. But one of the most common arguments I heard in favor of this episode was, and I'm going to put this in as nasally of a voice as I can, well, if you don't experience how horrible it is to murder innocent people, you'll never know how bad it is, and you won't understand it. You won't know not to do that in the future. By the way, that they actually pretty much say that in the episode too. They put this memorial out so other people would know how horrible it is, so other people wouldn't do horrible things. That's a dumb argument to start with. Again, remember my earlier point about how you guys have not been going out and murdering innocent civilians? Believe it or not, you and I both managed that without some kind of alien obelisk beaming the experience into our brains. Somehow, by some minuscule chance, we managed to be decent people without that kind of alien, invasive, deleterious, destructive influence on our minds. We managed that on our own. Thank you. The very argument that these people will just turn into raging psychos or commit horrific atrocities and blah, 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 if we don't actually experience those atrocities ourselves, that's one of the most vacuous, dumb arguments I have ever heard in Star Trek. And I've heard some whoppers in my time. And the fact that they actually approach that in the episode, that's actually one of their reasonings for repairing the damn memorial. This evil device that destroys people's brains, literally and metaphorically. What? I can't even... And they say the most stupid arguments in favor of that. They talk about, we want people to remember. Okay, have you ever been to Gettysburg? I have. It was a sober event. I'm saying that wrong. A sobering, somber event. It was horrible, actually, in its own quiet way. It felt like walking through a damn graveyard. And actually walking the hills and seeing where they placed the artillery and seeing how the battle plan lined out and learning the history of how it was the battle that shouldn't have even happened. All this horrible stuff. The historian and the war buff in me found it fascinating. The human being in me found it absolutely dread. Just not dreadful, but just dread. And I got all of that without them needing to beam it into my frickin' brain, didn't I? Can you imagine going to the Vietnam War Memorial? I've been to that one too, actually. Same overall period of time, actually. I was just visiting the D.C. area with my dad. Can you imagine going to the Vietnam War Memorial and actually reliving the hell that was the Vietnam War that those people went through? Could you imagine that for a moment? That's their argument. That's the point the episode is making. What the crap? Hang on, I haven't even looked at my notes in a while because all of this is just stuff I've had ready to go. But I don't want to. I had to check my notes for one thing. I have come up with one argument against myself here. I'm going to make this one argument. All of everything that I just said is from a fairly typical humanoid-ish mentality. I say that because obviously I am human. At least I think I am. But several species in Star Trek, most species in Star Trek really, do have the same general cultural mindset. In that, most of them consider horrific violence to be evil, and most of them consider, altruism to be good, Even though they sit different places on the scale, like the Klingons don't really agree with the Vulcans, for example, both groups still have several points of consensus, right? That's why I call it the humanoid culture. It is possible that whoever built this monument did not have the same cultural mindset, that to them, the idea of beaming this kind of horrific stuff into your brain is perfectly acceptable. That it's completely understandable, and that it is absolutely required. I mean, they're just seconds away from going all Dalek on the entire universe, if not for the fact that they're being reminded of how horrible it is. I just realized I'm kind of straw-manning my own argument here, but the point is that's the only counter-argument I've been able to come up with, is the culture, the people who made this are so alien that to them this is a completely acceptable thing. I suppose, I just had another counter-argument that just occurred to me right now. Maybe this was made by a group of extremists in their people, almost as a terrorist weapon, if you will, in order to try and prevent people from ever settling on what is now considered to them either sacred or respectful or, land that should not be settled, that this planet should be left alone as a monument. So they put this beacon here to ensure nobody else can ever settle there in the future, that kind of a thing. That's all I got. I can't believe that. I can't believe they rebuild the frickin' memorial. And I have my point here. Remember, I'm sorry, one other point about, because we're still talking about the memorial. This thing has been abandoned for 2 centuries. Think for a moment about what was happening in the year 1816. Just think about that for a moment. Seriously, I want you to go to Wikipedia right now, if you will, and look up 1816, okay? You can go ahead and pause the video. I'll wait just a moment. All right. You back? Are we ready? 1816. Think about everything that has done and been happened and changed and all the events that have happened in 2 freaking centuries. That's how long this thing has been completely abandoned. Did this race die out? Did they move on? Maybe they found this thing so horrible they couldn't come back to it, to try and shut it off or destroy it. Maybe they left it here and just died. I mean, we don't even know. The 2 centuries is a huge period of time. Anything could have happened. They could have turned into frickin' fish people by now, for all we know. They could have evolved into a new form of Q, for all we know. Who frickin' knows? I mean, even using an in-universe perspective, that would put this at like the year 2000 something, I want to say. Hang on. I'm going to look that up real quick, because I can pull up the date of the episode real quick. I got it up right here, because I do that. Here we go. So this is in the year 2376. So think about what was happening in universe in the year 2176. How completely different everything was back in that. Hang on, give me just a moment. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up here. Go back to the 2300s. There we go. Build up the timeline. 21. What did I say? 2176, right? In 2176 was about 21 years after Enterprise finished. When so Archer was still alive. This is before the timeline split into the Kelvin split. When Archer was still alive, when the Federation was still being founded, when the Romulans were still a mystery, when the Klingons were just doing their own thing over there, way back then, that's the period of time in which this memorial was abandoned. Think about that for a moment. It's ridiculous. I'm just rehashing this point over and over to get across the point that rebuilding this monument is stupid in every way. Because of the invasiveness, because of the destructiveness, because of the deleterious effect, because of the fact that the people who made it don't give a damn about it anymore. Let's move on to the rest of the episode, shall we? I don't have as many notes about the rest of the episode. I do want to talk about Brennan Braga really quick. So Braga did not do the teleplay for this episode, but he did do some of the writing for this episode. So I'm not sure what sits where as far as certain things. But I bring this up because there's some interactions right at the beginning between Tom and B'Elanna that are terrible. No, I'm just going to say it. They're bad. They're. I mean, I have one of those people who argues strongly that stereotypes or not stereotypes, tropes, cliches. There we go. That's the word I want to go. Cliches are not necessarily bad. It depends on how you implement them. And yet we have this thing where Tom has come back and B'Elanna's like, oh, I love you, and I did this special project just for you, and I got popcorn just for you, and he's zoning out watching the TV. It's such a common, stereotypical, just cliched piece of mess, and it's not well implemented. The dialogue and acting between the two in that scene is actually very wooden. And then, on top of that, it doesn't mean anything. I mean, obviously, it leads into the visions by Tom, but that could have been done in any other manner. So the actual usage of that cliche has no purpose other than to try and get a cheap laugh out of the audience. It's weird then because a lot of the character interactions later are much better. There's a scene a little bit later where Tom and B'Elanna are interacting again, and Tom is just losing it, completely losing it. Now, B'Elanna, being B'Elanna, she wants to meet this problem head on. That's her mindset, and that makes sense. So she is pushing him. He says, stop pushing me. She is actually pushing him legitimately and intentionally to try and work this over, to try and find a way around this, to try and resolve this situation. And he is not the kind of person who deals with something by pushing it. In fact, as we know, Tom Paris, he's the kind of person who usually deals with, deeper emotional, mental, whatever problems by sidestepping them or ignoring them or trying to move on from them or whatever. And so this conflict creates an honest-to-God argument between the two. Now that's interesting, and I wish they'd carried forward with this because this is the first true, real argument between Tom and B'Elanna with regards to their relationship. They've had snits before, and they've had stupid things that don't make sense or things that were because of alien influence or whatever. You could argue this is because of alien influence, but it's not. Because that's not what they're arguing about. They're not arguing about the memorial. They're not arguing about the memories. They're arguing about how they're affecting him. That's the point of argument. That he doesn't want to be comforted. That he doesn't want to feel better. That he has no idea how to comprehend or cope with things. Remember, Tom Paris, while he is not as innocent or naive as Harry Kim, is a very good person. He is someone who has a strong moral compass and follows it very stringently. He's got much more of the Kirk in him, for example, than the Picard, to give you an idea of what I mean by that. And so the idea of him doing something this horrible really, really scars him. And it is that is the centerpiece of this argument. If this had carried forward and been more character development for them and for their relationship, that would have been great. To my knowledge, feel free to correct me off the top of my head, this is not followed up on because it's Voyager, and of course it's not followed up on. But it's a good scene. It has much better chemistry, much better dialogue, and the acting is much better. It's in total contrast to the earlier scene, which was just a cliche-ridden mess of wooden acting that didn't mean anything. I also want to point out something because I feel like I don't even have to, but I do feel Braga's footprints are on some of this episode's writing. So, for example, they send out the Delta Flyer to go on a mining mission without support for a few weeks. Why? Now, I'm not saying that can't be explained away, but it never is. And that is actually my point. And this is a sign of get to the plot writing. Or some people refer to it as because plot. Why are they off doing this? Because plot. Because they needed these 4 characters to be separate from the rest of the crew so they could start up the mystery and build up the thing and blah, blah, blah. One of the things Braga is actually pretty good at is that kind of head games, mystery building, storytelling in general. It's one of the things that actually got him noticed back on the TNG writing staff. Timescape, I believe, is the name of an episode he did, which structurally seems actually quite similar to this episode, if you really analyze the skeleton of the two. But, so, I just felt like pointing it out. Why is the Delta Flyer off without support? And that's really important. They haven't been in contact with Voyager for 2 weeks. Do you know how many bad things can happen in that time? Do you know how many horrible things can happen to either side of the things in that time? But no, we're going to do that. Why? Because plot. It's never bothered to be explained. It just happens because the plot needs it to happen, and that is lazy writing, if not outright bad writing. This brings me to a point, though. I've actually talked somewhat recently about the differences between an idea person and an implementation person and how you need both in order to actually really have success. This episode is a really weird episode because Brannon Braga in general is actually a pretty good idea man. He comes up with high concept stuff pretty well and pretty easily. He doesn't handle the low concept stuff as well. He doesn't handle character stuff nearly as well. It's one of the reasons I've always felt he's really well paired when he works with Ronald D. Moore or Joe Menosky, both of which are very, very good at character stuff. So, you get the high concept, you get the character stuff, and boom, you get some good stuff, like Scorpion, for example, or All Good Things. Two excellent examples of what I'm talking about. Braga, this is a weird episode to talk about because the memorial thing obviously pisses me off to hell and back. I think I've made that point clear. But this is a high concept episode which, aside from a few stumbling blocks at the very beginning, is very well implemented. And I think a lot of that rests on the director. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But he's, you know what, here, I'll pull it up. I've already got this right here. I've already got my notes. Alan Croker. Might be pronouncing that wrong. He's the director. He is a long-standing director with Star Trek. He's been with Voyager since season 3, DS9 since season 5. He did a lot of directing of some of the better episodes of Enterprise. He's a good director. He knows his stuff, is what I'm trying to say. And he pulls a lot of good emotion into scenes that otherwise probably wouldn't have had it. And again, as I mentioned before, the principal actors of this episode really nail their parts. So even though the memorial itself is this evil, horrible act, and even though the ending makes me literally facepalm, as in I actually pulled my glasses off and when the episode concluded, even though I knew it was coming, it is a very well-executed episode. I'm reminded of The Cloud, actually, all the way back at the beginning of Voyager, which was a dumb episode at its concept, but then very well implemented by good directing and good acting, and a lot of little details that helped make it way better of an episode than it otherwise should have been. Also, I hate to point this out, but didn't we do this episode before? The episode Remember, B'Elanna? You remember that? No. I already mentioned the great acting, some great showing off of post-traumatic stress. The way Neelix was chopping the potato or whatever it was actually really well done. The way Garrett Wang was acting in his claustrophobia was actually really good. They do some really, really good stuff with it. And they even make sense about it. Because who's the one member of the four of them who copes with it well? Chakotay. Because of course he does. We've got Neelix, enough said. Harry Kim, the Green Lieutenant. Tom Paris, the Moral Compass. And a guerrilla fighter. Of course Chakotay is the one who could cope and comprehend these memories better than others. The one who could put some sense to them. The one who can lay down some logic and actually... It's not such much of a contrast between himself and his memories, so that there's at least some similarities there that he can use to adapt and cope better. And I like that. That's very logical and very sense-making. They never even call it out, too, which is nice. They don't have to flat out say... They don't have to treat the audience like they're idiots and say, Chakotay can deal with these better because he's an ex-Maquis. They don't have to say that. We just know that. We know the character and we know how he's acting. So that's actually pretty well done, too. And I mentioned the great directing. There's some great musical choices in this episode. Believe it or not, I know good music in a Voyager episode is just weird. And there's some really good directing with camera angles and perspective shots that they do at several points in time to really add a lot of tension and drama to scenes that probably wouldn't have it otherwise. I also want to note that Neelix, when he goes into his paranoid rage, is very protective of Naomi. Of course he is! It's Neelix. First of all, he's always been very protective of Naomi, arguably overprotective of Naomi. But that itself is a development of a earlier character trait of his protective nature of children in general. Remember how he interacted with his sister. Remember how he interacted with the girl who died as a result of the destruction of I can't remember the name, the moon. The moon that was destroyed. This is all the way back. The end of season 1 is when this was, and my point is, this is a character trait that's been developed over the course of the years. So it's a natural continuation of Neelix as a character. This is why I say this is a weird episode to talk about, because I hate the memorial itself. I hate the monument, and I hate that they fix it. I hate the ending so much, and they're also damn sanctimonious about it. Oh, these dead people will be so glad that you're beaming their experiences into other people's brains. But the execution of this episode is actually really spot on. There's a lot of good continuity, a lot of good character motion, a lot of good acting, and a lot of good writing, and a lot of good directing, and a lot of good music. It's just so weird to talk about this episode. I also, speaking of which, I also really, really like the roundtable scene. Anybody out there remember the episode Schisms? I actually kind of name dropped that earlier on purpose. It's the episode in TNG where Riker and I forget who else are all experimented on by these subspace aliens who, it turns out, were actually related to the Dyson spheres. And, oh, I'm sorry, that's Star Trek Online. But the point being, you remember the episode, right? The subspace aliens, the experiments that were happening, all that stuff. There's a great scene in there where they start talking, and the pace of the scene very slowly accelerates as they start to remember more and more and more. They're on the holodeck describing the place where they were at. You remember that scene? It's a great scene. I recommend that episode just for that scene. It's very well acted, very well directed, very well paced. There's a scene in this episode that immediately reminded me of that for the exact same reason. It's when they're all sitting there and they're trying to remember, and then one person says something which triggers something in another person, which triggers something in another person, and the dialogue flows naturally around the room. That's why I call it the roundtable room, the roundtable scene, because it flows naturally from one character to the next as they remember more and they feel more and they experience more, and then we get to see some of it, and then it comes back to them, and again the pace kind of keeps increasing and accelerating as they get more and more into how horrible it is, and it finally ends on that bombshell. We killed 82 civilians. Bam. Cut to commercial. It's a great scene. It is a great scene. Very well acted. Very well directed. I hate to keep saying that, but it's true. That one scene alone shines in this episode. I obviously don't do the outro stuff anymore because CBS is evil. Hashtag screw CBS. But if I was still doing it, that is the scene I would pick. You know, for those of you who know where I was picking my favorite scenes in an episode to put in my outro, that's the scene I would put absolutely at the outro of this episode. Believe it or not, that's actually all I got. I thought about discussing one line. There's a line that Seven says, which is paraphrased, guilt is a useful if difficult emotion. Mentioning how, you know, she feels shame because of what she, putting that in quotes, did as a Borg drone. Even acknowledging the obvious illogic there because she wasn't doing those horrible things. The fact of the matter remains that she implies that she holds on to that guilt in order to remind her of how she wishes to be in the future. That's a whole topic, which is a whole video by itself, which I've decided not to discuss in full, except in one point. I have to question the reality of guilt being a useful emotion, because it is my personal experience, and with the people I've seen in real life, that holding on to guilt for something too long is a bad thing. Holding on to it too short is a bad thing. But holding on to it just the right period of time so that you remind yourself of how you screwed up or how you deliberately did something wrong is a method by which you can go forward and grow and evolve emotionally and whatnot. But it's one of those very dangerous, dual-edged sword situations, which is why I say this is such a complicated topic. So I just wanted to toss that thought out there really quick. Otherwise, that's all I've got for this episode. I will see you next time for Dwayne Johnson, the episode.